There's an old saying in Florida, the farther north you go, the further south you get. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to places. And today I want to talk to you about one place in particular. It's a place in these here United States, a place that's home to famous retirees like Jack Nicklaus, Barry Gibb and international swindler Mickey Mouse. And it's also a place that I first visited when I was 8 years old, and that place is Florida. The Sunshine State, the 27th of its kind, admitted to the Union in 1845. It's a state of about 21 million people and is roughly 2/3 the size of the entire United Kingdom. But there's just one question. Where the heck is it? Now, this might seem like a strange question from somebody who has already been there, but hear me out, because while I'm quite aware that Florida is this curiously shaped object to the southeast, it isn't always entirely clear to which region it belongs. Just as I lost days of sleep trying to figure out whether Oklahoma was in the Midwest or the South, I've had an equally sleep-deprived few weeks trying to figure out Florida. Specifically, is it or isn't it part of the American South? I mostly ask this because, in a vague sense, Florida always seemed like one of those places whose regional identity was up for mass debate. That is, a debate that's large, not... And yet, to date, no state in the lower 48 boasts a more southerly point than Florida's base. Indeed, the United States Census Bureau, the very same Census Bureau that excluded Oklahoma from the Midwest, shuffles Florida into a neat pack of southern cards that also includes Maryland and Delaware. What the... Surely then that's case closed. But is it? Because while Florida might be 100% geographically in the South, culturally speaking, the jury is only just warming up. You see, last month I put this very question to the Lost in the Pond community, giving first dibs to my patrons at patreon.com/lostinthepond. The first of 3 polls found that 62% believed Florida did indeed belong to the South, while 38% did not. Now, admittedly, given the intimate nature of my Patreon page, a sample size of 13 didn't seem like it would hold up to scrutiny in a court of YouTube comments. So I did what any good investigative journalist would do. I went to Twitter. And while the number of respondents differed there considerably from the Patreon poll, the results did not. Indeed, 63% said Florida was part of the South, 37%, again just over a third, said it wasn't. Amazing, but a sample size of 191, while likely to convince a jury if wine is involved, is still only the size of an average grade 7 class. Just ask any teacher. What I needed was a sample size in the thousands, so I turned to you fine folks right here on YouTube. With 2,700 votes counted, the outcome once again was similar. 65% said yes, 35% said no. It was official. On this issue, a third of Americans didn't consider Florida to be part of the American South. The question is, why? Let's take a look at the evidence. For a foreigner like me, figuring out American geography can be a challenge. Thank goodness then that I have Americans and the internet to help me through. Emerging from the comments, 2 key reasons were cited for Florida not being part of the South. The first of those was people. How do members of the human race differ between Florida and, say, Alabama? At a basic level, of course, they don't. I mean, the basic needs and wants of humans to survive, to raise a family, to squabble over who has the remote, is the same the world over. But there are differences in demographics. For instance, and this is important, Florida attracts more out-of-state retirees than any state not called New Mexico. So not only does Florida boast a higher percentage of over 65s than any of the surrounding states, but as of 2012, only 36% of Florida's population, just over a third, was actually born in the state. And as you can see from this map, where dark green represents instances of very few native-born residents and dark blue the opposite, states immediately to the north of Florida are, shall we say, producing their own. Naturally, of course, this could mean that Florida is sort of a hodgepodge of different cultures and is not necessarily defined by a southern way of doing things. When you consider as well the unique statistic that 70% of all Cuban Americans, for example, reside in the state, then Florida, as John Taylor puts it on Patreon, is sort of its own thing. And something that adds tremendous weight to this argument is the second key talking point, that Florida is one big theme park. Indeed, my own experiences of the state, though brief, were precisely that. Now, this might have something to do with the fact that my family and I spent our entire 2 weeks in the central region. You see, for example, in Orlando, you have the worlds of Disney and, Sea, that is Disney World and Sea World. Not to mention Universal Studios, and then of course to the east you have Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center, and then out west on the other side of the state you have Busch Gardens, where I once touched a man's huge snake. And to Brits such as myself, this is pretty much how we picture Florida. Roller coasters, beaches, talking mice, and Miami. But this is probably not how most people view the South. I mean, where are all of the cattle ranches? Where are the barrels of sweet tea? And that brings us on to our counter-argument. There's an old saying in Florida, the farther north you go, the further south you get. And that's because at the top of the state, some 450 miles north of Key West, there's a stretch of land with a decidedly southern feel. The Florida Panhandle. Now, we heard in the last segment, only 36% of Florida's population was actually born in the state. We also heard that a third of Americans don't believe Florida belongs to the South. Coincidence? Probably. But let's take a look at that map again, because what do we find? The Panhandle is the only part of the state where native-born residents actually outnumber non-native-born residents, perhaps then informing the continuation of Southern culture and cultural norms. After all, prior to World War II, this wouldn't have even been a question. Florida was indisputably Southern. The Magic Kingdom was still the stuff of a madman's dreams, and the state's population was the lowest in the South. And if you want to go back even further than that, Florida was one of the original Confederate states in the fight against the North. So there is certainly history on the side of the argument that says Florida is part of the South. For me, I'm undecided at this point. I could be swayed either way over this question, but I think I'm going to finish today's video by sitting on the fence until it hurts, by declaring that Florida is indeed its own thing. But let me know what you think. Is Florida its own thing, or is it culturally Southern? Or does it even matter? Thanks for watching. Goodbye. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.